During the summer of 2013, Turkey was consumed with protest. From May 30th until July 2nd, protesters were abused by police. The protest started as an environmental sit-in to save Gezi Park from bulldozers. Prime Minister Erdogan wanted to build a shopping mall and luxury flats in the place of the park. The police responded with excessive force using tear gas, water cannons, mace, and electric batons. Prime Minister Erdogan did little to pacify the protest, and he only furthered their anger by calling them a bunch of looters influenced by extremists, and insisted his development project would go on as planned. His supporters, and the ruling Justice and Development Party, also known as the AKP, attacked protesters all over Turkey alongside police. The responsibilities of the government is to protect its citizens' natural rights of life, liberty, and property, according to John Locke. The Turkish government policies of desecularization and censorship and the virtually unchecked power of the prime minister cause a violation of human rights, including impediment of its citizens' rights to assemble peacefully, and cruel, degrading, and inhumane treatment from the police force, which resulted in a fight for the preservation of natural rights. The citizens of Turkey have unprecedented government intervention in their lives. Their media is censored to the point of state-run news agencies making completely false stories. Journalists are arrested for criticizing the government. During his terms, the Prime Minister has taken measures to greatly reduce his citizens' right to free speech and freedom of assembly. A man was even handed a 10-month prison sentence for insulting religious beliefs. Erdogan's government has banned certain websites such as YouTube and Twitter in his country. Before the protest erupted, a blogger was arrested for allegedly insulting the Prophet Muhammad in a blog on his post. The Radio and Television Supreme Court fined a number of stations for harming the physical, morale, and mental development of children and young people because they covered the protest. To communicate with others, the demonstrators used Twitter to call them to the square. The policies the Turkish government forces upon its people are both oppressive and counterintuitive. Before the protests, Prime Minister Erdogan banned the Republic Day March organized by his opposition, the CHP. In a move to the far right, the Prime Minister attempted to make abortion virtually unattainable. Also, Erdogan proposed to change government to the American presidential system in an effort to grab more power. Another policy, perhaps the most telling example of the desecularization, the government passed a law that banned the sale of alcohol from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. and banned the consumption of alcohol within 100 meters of a mosque. All the government's policies were carried out without any public consultation. The protests in Turkey started as an environmental sit-in in order to save Gezi Park. Gezi Park was set to be demolished in order for a shopping mall and luxury flats to be built on the land. The building project was the Prime Minister's idea, and he did not check public opinion beforehand. The protests may have started as a fight to save a park, but they soon became a fight to save democracy in Turkey. Gezi Park was the final straw for the Turkish people in a long, but so far, silent struggle against an oppressive and authoritarian government. The park was set to be demolished on May 28, 2013. To stop this from happening, 50 environmental demonstrators set up tents inside the park to stop the bulldozers from advancing. At this point, nobody in Turkey expected a small sit-in to turn all of Turkey into a complete chaos. At first, the bulldozers halted to the protesters and did not proceed into the park. To clear the park from peaceful protesters, the police force used tear gas and burnt down their tents, thus allowing the bulldozers to continue the demolition. The disproportionate response by the police made it impossible to overlook any other issues in Turkey anymore. It was the tipping point for the start of change. When the first canister was fired, the protests were no longer about saving a park, but the preservation of democracy and natural rights. Over the next few days, more Turks entered Gezi Park to support the fight for democracy. They were notified of the police action by Twitter, which Prime Minister Erdogan later attempted to ban. The police once again used tear gas and water cannons to clear the protesters out of Gezi Park, this time setting up barricades to prevent reoccupation. Because of this brutality, protests rose up in the surrounding provinces of Ankara and Izmir. The responses by the police in these provinces were no different than the actions of Gezi Park. Tear gas, water cannons, and electric batons were the weapons of choice to clear the tens of thousands of protesters. In an example of even further censorship, the police arrested 24 people that were accused of using Twitter to urge others to join the protest. In response to this and the police brutality, a crowd of 10,000 gathered in Kizili Square to fight for democracy and their rights in a peaceful manner. They were suppressed with tear gas and water cannons. From June 11th to June 15th, the police assaulted Taksim Square in a military-like invasion. Using an unprecedented force of tear gas, water cannons, and rubber bullets, the police fired at the tens of thousands of protesters and anything else that moved, including children. This caused most of the protesters to retreat into Gezi Park. And in an effort to make the riot police look better on camera, undercover cops dressed as protesters threw Molotov cocktails at the police. The water fired out of the cannons at the protesters was mixed with pepper spray to cause first and second degree burns. In between assaults, there was a piano concert in the square. Demonstrators also gave first aid to police officers injured by falling wood. One witness described the scene when the police resumed the assault, saying, "There was a concert by a well-known musician with hundreds of people and families in a festival atmosphere in the square, and then suddenly, from all sides, the police came with water cannons and tear gas. The assault on Taksim Square was successful, and re-entry of the square was forbidden. Anyone who entered was treated as a terrorist. After the invasion was finished, thousands of protesters were injured and multiple head injuries from tear gas canisters. Prime Minister Erdogan, however, praised the police operation as a success." In an effort to downplay the protest in Taksim Square, the Radio and Television Supreme Council fined stations that broadcasted coverage of the protest for harming the physical, morale, and mental development of children and young people. A state-run news agency also ran a false story that an anchor for CNN made up the protest for money. This made Twitter the only reputable news source. The police also began to use water cannons and tear gas against journalists covering the protest. As a result of the police brutality towards protesters and the censorship by the government, tens of thousands of workers across many cities in Turkey rose up and declared a general strike on June 17. Turkey was at a standstill because of Prime Minister Erdogan and his policies. The same day, the iconic Standing Man protest in front of the Ataturk Cultural Center began. The Standing Man is where one stands in silence, staring straight ahead, doing nothing. It was a type of passive resistance. The next day, the passive resistant protests began throughout the rest of Turkey. Some were even arrested. The actions of police on June 22nd may never truly be understood. To pay respect to the lives lost during the protest, the demonstrators gathered in Taksim Square. They threw carnations at the police and called them for brotherhood, saying, "We are your brothers." Instead of brotherhood, the police responded with water cannons, injuring more protesters. June 30th marked the last day of madness. The redevelopment project for Gezi Park was blocked by a court a few days later. The mayor of Istanbul stated that in future, all major projects in the city would have public consultation first. There is not one cause to the protest, but many intertwined causes that were sparked by the excessive use of force at Gezi Park. The Turkish police have extremely awful working conditions, as mentioned by Emmett Sen when he said, "The violence you see at the end is the reflection of the violence suffered by the policemen. They are not just subjected to the violence by protesters, but by 120-hour consecutive working periods, stale bread, and food. The police are already subjected to violence within the establishment." During the protest, at least 6 policemen committed suicide as a result of the harsh working condition. The brutality the police used at Gezi Park led to protests of other issues throughout Turkey. Prime Minister Erdogan was perhaps a bigger cause of the protest. His attempts to move Turkey to a desecularized society was opposed by many. The banning of the consumption of alcohol within 100 meters of a mosque is unacceptable in modern nations. The censorship of its citizens is also unacceptable. If Twitter is the only reliable news source, something has been done wrong. Even after the initial summer protests ended, Erdogan attempted to ban Twitter and YouTube. If Erdogan consulted the public before he went ahead with his controversial building projects and policies, there would be nothing to protest. It is safe to say that the Prime Minister is the main cause of the protests in Turkey. For Turkey to move past all of this, Prime Minister Erdogan needs to be removed from power. His cult of personality needs to be dismantled by his successor. The Turkish citizens' natural rights of life, liberty, and property, as established by John Locke, need to be guaranteed to prevent any other protest on this scale. The new leader of Turkey will have to consult the public before interfering with his citizens' affairs. The desecularized law Erdogan established needs to be abandoned and replaced with a rule of law. The parliamentary system should stay the same in Turkey, as a switch to an American-style presidency would only give someone in Erdogan's position more power. A government can never censor its people. That would only lead to strong distrust of the government. The Radio and Television Supreme Council also has to allow channels to run the truth instead of fighting for it. The way the police system works also needs to be restructured. There has to be no more 120 work-hour weeks or consecutive shifts. After a month of madness, 16 lay dead, another 8,163 were injured, and 4,900 arrested. A human rights observer compared what he had seen in Turkey to Gaza. The Prime Minister did nothing to pacify the situation, and used the police and his supporters to suppress protests of things that only benefit him.